Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this July 28, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Tonight, friends, we open with a story, two stories tonight. Friends, our first two stories relate to the fourth seal from the book of Revelation, the pale horse. Not only does that relate to the main thing that Jesus Christ spoke about in plain language using the Greek word of the day, loimos, meaning disease epidemics and pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, but he also spoke of conditions between the third seal and the fifth seal as being seismos. And again, our first two stories relate to this fourth seal in that there's a Ebola outbreak. We'll be showing you in the first story. Following that, we'll be showing you the sudden, out of a clear blue sky, lightning bolt that struck near a pier in Los Angeles, in California. We'll tell you exactly where when we get to the story in a moment. That killed one person and seriously injured 15 others. But first, let's go to this story out of Liberia, where the Ebola outbreak has caused most border crossings to close.
There is no known cure, so it's a race against time. This is the deadliest Ebola outbreak on record. Doctors here at a hospital in Sierra Leone are receiving patients who want to make sure they've not been infected. The latest figures from the World Health Organization say more than 1,200 people have been infected in the region. Around 670 of them have died. More than 319 of the deaths have been reported in Guinea, with over 220 deaths in Sierra Leone and more than 120 deaths in Liberia, and one recorded death in Nigeria. So deadly is the virus that it's being compared to war.
Ebola, the youth there, we the youth there will boku pass.
For Ebola, many more young people are infected than old. Ebola is worse than the rebel war. In the past, when there was fighting, you could hear the gunshots and run away. But if I have Ebola, those around me won't know, and I could infect them.
Liberia has now closed all but 3 border crossings, restricted public gatherings, and quarantined communities that are heavily affected by the Ebola outbreak. In Nigeria, all points of entry, including land, sea and air, have been placed on red alert. And Nigeria's largest airline, Arik Air, has suspended all flights to Liberia and Sierra Leone. Sophie Ikenya, BBC News.
Our next story will also relate to this fourth seal that you see the fourth column over. It's got a green color in that column, and that's to indicate that the book of Revelation depicts the fourth seal as a pale horse with a rider whose name is Death. And alongside this pale horse and its rider named Death rides Hades, hell, the grave. And that's just to emphasize the fact that the events, the actualities, in the plain language happenings of this particular seal are very deadly, results in death. And that's exactly what's happened related to our next story that I told you we'd be covering, related to this fourth seal. One person has been killed and at least 15 others taken to hospital in Los Angeles after being struck by lightning. They were caught in a thunderstorm that hit Venice Beach in the early afternoon. Another person was struck by lightning on a golf course on Catalina Island, about 26 miles off the California coast from southern tip of Los Angeles. I've been there a few times. Richard Lister has this report, friends.
This was the scene minutes after a violent electrical storm caused panic on one of America's most famous beaches. The emergency services responding to reports that several people had been injured by lightning. beachgoers said the only warning they'd had was when the sky suddenly darkened.
I said, this is not a good place to be. We should go inside because I don't feel like getting killed today. And then moments later, all hell broke loose.
All of a sudden you heard this crackle, this giant bolt up in the sky that I've never seen like that. And I'm from the Midwest, so we see lots of lightning. And then all of a sudden it was the loudest thunder I ever heard. And it was like a scene out of Jaws. All the mothers were going in to grab their kids.
All of a sudden there was a big flash of light and a boom, and I felt like someone punched me in the back of my head, like right here. And it went down my whole side of my right body, and my calf sort of locked up, and I fell over.
This man lying stunned on the shoreline was one of at least a dozen people treated at the scene. Most of those affected had been in the water when the lightning struck.
They have been packaged and sent away. For the most part, all of them are doing very well. There was the initial person who had received some, what we consider to be some serious injuries, and they have been transported to a local facility.
Of those taken to hospital, one is critically injured, another has died. Helicopters patrolled the shoreline searching for more casualties. Lifeguards fanned out across the surf to be sure no one had been missed. The storm was a brief interruption on a sunny afternoon, but for at least one family it meant a day at the beach ended tragically. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Friends, for our next story that relates to what's happening right now in the Middle East between Gaza and Israel, I'm going to read you a little bit of the lead into this story, and then I try to not comment too much before we play you a video story, friends, but on some of them I have to say a few things to let you who are watching it know that I'm not in agreement with what the news is featuring or what the main government leader and the leader of the United Nations, in essence, is a certain type of government leader, especially when you hear him use language, even though he kind of muffles it, muddles over it as he says it here in this report, but it's in there. He says he ordered the Prime Minister of Israel to unconditionally stop firing in the Gaza, to stop their strikes. He ordered him to unconditionally cease fire. In other words, he's saying, don't defend yourself here, Israel. Why, with that kind of situation or condition where you're restrained from shooting back at your enemy may well say, oh, this is our moment, guys, let's have at it. Let's let the rockets roll. And let's get in those tunnels and get in there and grab off a few Israeli civilians and military people, whatever, that we can use for our cause, which, as we went over last night, the baseline of their cause is the destruction of Israel, the annihilation of every Jew or descendant of Judah or Benjamin or any of the other tribes, the Levites of Israel, anybody there who's not recognizably a descendant of Ishmael, an Arab, in other words, or as they improperly call them, Palestinians. Our goal is to do away with them and to do away with Israel as a nation and as a boundary around. That's the charter in the Hamas organization that rules and reigns over Gaza. Now, and just like Russia that said, that claims they had nothing to do with sending up a rocket to take down that commercial plane, and we saw videotape. I mean, that's the best evidence in the world of a Russian rocket launcher being moved out of the area over there. A news source caught that. Well, but Russia says, oh, that's photoshopped, that's a lie. So they tell you can't even believe your own eyes. But here's what's going to happen in this next video. Let me give you the lead-in. Gaza is in a critical condition, the lead-in says, and violence there must stop in the name of humanity. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon says. He was speaking at the United Nations headquarters in New York after returning from a visit to the region in the Middle East. Mr. Ban Ki-moon was critical of both sides for firing into civilian areas and urged an immediate halt to the violence. You know, even though that sounds like a logical statement in one way, when the side from Gaza is known for hiding their weapons behind civilians and placing the entrances to the tunnels under the homes of civilians, and these things, the tunnels and the weapons, are dangerous to Israel, and they're being used against Israel, and for its defense, little Israel, like a lion, it sees a problem, it says, let's go in and take care of the problem. You as the enemy of Israel, you say, we'll get the world's sympathy. We don't care about our civilians, our kids, our women. We will put them in front. You know, civilians, including men too. We'll put them in front of our weapons. We'll put the entrances to the tunnels under civilian homes. And then when Israel comes in and needs to take them out, well, some of our civilians will be straggling behind. We'll make sure they don't get word about it, and then the world will have sympathy with our cause when we cause these civilians to be killed by Israel attempting to defend itself. You'll also hear Israel in several videos tonight be called the aggressor when, for instance, Hamas started shooting the rockets. Hamas amassed 10,000 rockets, started firing them into Israel. Hamas dug all these tunnels with concrete, some of which was supported by money, you'll hear, money provided by Israel for the building of schools. And what did they do instead of building schools with that money for the concrete? They bought concrete and dug deep tunnels so they could invade and kidnap Israeli soldiers and civilians. Gaza complains about their borders being shut and supplies being more or less cut off, supplies being restricted so they can be investigated, and where Israel can stop weapons from going into Gaza, it can catch them and stop them. But all of that was the result of Hamas being allowed to govern in Israel and go in and take and kidnap one of the Israeli soldiers. That resulted in the restrictions being placed on Gaza. Now, let's hear in this first story, let's hear, and I'm going to stop him at a certain point because this is just too much. Let's hear what Ban Ki-moon has to say.
As the world marks Eid al-Fitr, it is time for an immediate unconditional humanitarian ceasefire. In the name of humanity, the violence must stop.
Now listen, that sounds good. Let's have a unilateral ceasefire. But Mr. Ban Ki-moon, you know good and well in almost every ceasefire that's come up, even those that Hamas has initiated, the few they've initiated, they don't keep their word. They do not adhere to a ceasefire. And really, when you come right down to it, militarily, I'm just speaking in military terms, friends, when an enemy has a mass of weapons, and their only purpose for their weapons is not defense, it's offense against Israel and to destroy Israel. Weapons and tunnels. What you should be saying is, look, put your people in a safe place. We're going to help Israel go in and knock out all that weaponry you have amassed against them, that you are aggressively using against them, and to get rid of those tunnels you'll use to kidnap Israel's civilians and soldiers. So until you turn over your weapons. You started this. Turn over your weapons, blow up your tunnels yourself, and let us do an inspection in there. Until that happens, hey, no ceasefire. The best way for this thing to be resolved is you got no weapons against Israel. You stop your aggression against Israel. Israel showed you a kindness. It gave you Gaza, and along with Gaza, you complain about having no means of income or something like that. You destroyed a profit-making set of dozens of greenhouses that Israel gave to you when it gave you Gaza. You have destroyed the opportunity you would have had by your hatred for Israel. You've got hatred of Israel so much in mind, and the destruction of Israel so much in mind, you're unable to be productive. And I think the biggest, most incredible example that people, they're going to want to ignore this. You see, they hear the truth about some of these things, and but the world is against Israel. Hamas has managed to get the world's sympathy against Israel, so let's ride that wave. And everybody says, well, they duck and they get kind of chicken and cowardly go along with the rest of the world when they know the real truth is, for example, like the concrete that Israel helped provide to Hamas to build schools. And instead of Hamas building schools, they built tunnels because of their hatred for the Israelis, so they could go in and destroy Israel. That's their goal. That's a chartered goal in Hamas's charter, is the destruction of Israel. All right. We're going to let Mr. Banke go on, but friends, I hope you are hearing the prejudice, the bias and the prejudice and the hatred against Israel and the stupidity, the naive stupidity of let's ceasefire, instead of, friends, there's going to be no ceasefire until Israel takes out those weapons and tunnels. Then we can talk about ceasefire. But you're going to have no weapons where you can fire at Israel. If you weren't doing that, if there were no tunnels and no weapons, Israel wouldn't be over there. They gave you Gaza. They tried to help you with greenhouses. They tried to help you with concrete for building schools. You built tunnels of war, terrorist tunnels with that gift of concrete for schools. How naive can people be? But the God of this world blinds their minds and fuses people with hatred against Israel. You know, I almost hate to watch the rest of this or even share it with you, but the news is propagating it and helping, what's the word? Propagandize it. So let's watch the next minute and a half of this, friends.
As you know, I have just returned from the region. Over the course of 6 days, I held extensive consultations with the leaders in the region in 8 countries in the Middle East, as well as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who has been working tirelessly and valiantly to end the fighting. Since my return during the weekend, I have continued with a number of calls to world leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel.
All right, I'm going to let you hear what he said to Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel in a moment, but he just mentioned John Kerry, who he said has been working tirelessly, to get these ceasefires and have peace or whatever. You know, that's a wrong objective at the present moment. The objective should not just be ceasefires while Hamas has weapons and tunnels with a chartered goal of the destruction of Israel. That shouldn't be allowed to exist. They should say, hey, look, we're not going to try to stop Israel from taking out those weapons and those tunnels, and if some people get hurt in the process, you better try to protect those people instead of using them as human shields, because Hamas, we're going to hold you accountable. That's how it should really come down. But, all right, now listen, hear about his talk that he had with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel now.
This morning, I had a long talk with him, again, urging him to stop this violence and agree.
Friends, I wish I could play that again for you. I want to have you catch it while he just said it. Did you hear him use the words? He ordered him to stop the violence. He ordered the Prime Minister of Israel to stop the violence. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, do you not understand that what Israel is trying to do is stop the violence, is to stop the rockets and to get rid of the tunnels by which Hamas could come into Israel and kidnap civilians and soldiers. And they already have used those tunnels to kill a few Israelis. Those tunnels need to be eradicated. You don't stop a man trying to get rid of the things his enemy is using against him. You don't order him to do a unilateral ceasefire when you've got an enemy who has the goal of your total destruction, who has weapons and tunnels that need to be eradicated. And he says he ordered Israel. Why don't you order Hamas to stop shooting the rockets and order Hamas to destroy those tunnels? And then order Hamas to let the UN or Israel or the United States, let John Kerry go down and personally inspect to see if all the tunnels are done away with. You know, you buddy up with John Kerry, who interferes with, if you'd leave it alone for a little bit, if you'd stop trying to restrict Israel, it could go in and do the job. You guys are messing it up big time. But friends, let's hear the rest of him.
Agree and honor the international community's joint common efforts and call for urgent humanitarian unconditional ceasefire. Gaza is a critical condition. Israeli missiles have pummeled Gaza.
That sounds good in a way, but again, listen to the words he's using. They're calling for a unilateral ceasefire. Hamas has already proved themselves. They don't honor ceasefires. Stay out of it. Let Israel take out the weapons and take out the tunnels.
Hamas rockets have randomly struck Israel. No country would accept the threat of rockets from above and tunnels from below. At the same time, all occupying powers have an international legal obligation to protect the civilians.
Well, listen, why don't we focus for a moment on Syria? If the international community has an obligation to protect civilians, how successful has it been over in Syria and that situation that's dragged on now for 3 years? Huh? You know, friends, let's see what's happening. There is some extreme bias and prejudice happening against Israel. Who's responsible for that? We'll cover that in a moment. Let's go back to let Mr. Ban Ki-moon finish up here. Oops, I think he is finished up. Let's see. Okay, yeah, thankfully that was the end of it right there. Let's go to the next video. Israel confirmed 5 of its soldiers died today, 1 inside Gaza and 4 in a mortar attack along the border. 5 Hamas militants were also killed inside Israel. Inside Israel, officials said. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned of a prolonged Israeli campaign in Gaza, saying, you'll hear him in this video, saying Israel would not finish its operation until it had neutralized Hamas tunnels out of Gaza. Orla Gorin reports from Jerusalem.
Soldiers evacuate a brother in arms, wounded by a Hamas mortar. That attack killed 4 troops along the border. Another died in combat inside Gaza. 48 Israeli soldiers have been killed in Operation Protective Edge, a heavy loss for one of the world's strongest armies. As the wounded were rushed away, danger from below. There was a frantic search for Palestinian militants who reached Israel through an underground tunnel. One attacker was killed. Within hours, the government pledged it would keep fighting in Gaza. in spite of growing international demands for a truce.
We need to be prepared for a protracted campaign. We will continue to act firmly and with discretion until we complete our mission to defend our citizens.
And here's a glimpse of the key battleground for Israel, an extensive network of what it calls terror tunnels that reach across the border. This army video shows the destruction of a tunnel. If tunnels are the targets, there have been several hundred Palestinian civilians killed above ground. The US is still calling for a truce.
We believe the momentum generated by a humanitarian ceasefire is the best way to be able to begin to negotiate and find out if you can put in place a sustainable ceasefire.
Friends, that would only lead to what President Obama has been trying to accomplish, and that's a two-state solution situation that really, especially now, won't work, and that would only leave Israel more vulnerable to destruction by the descendants of Ishmael, Hamas, and terrorist groups like that. And why these people can't see it there's a reason why they can't see it, but we'll talk about that in a moment.
Israel buried another young soldier today, a 22-year-old called Liad. His family said he was their hero. This nation is in mourning, like its neighbours across the border. Israel has made it clear there are more days of war to come. It's blaming Hamas for failing to honour previous ceasefires. 21 days on, the international community has been unable to halt the bloodshed. On both sides, the casualties are likely to increase. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Jerusalem.
All right, friends, before I talk to you too much more, I want to show you a report next by Ian Pennell, reporting from Gaza, and I'm going to give you some of the reports that actually contain even more bias and prejudice against Israel, but we'll try to balance that out in a moment. We'll talk about it.
The following report contains some disturbing images.
It was supposed to be a day of celebration in Gaza, but it ended with the blood of children. They'd been playing in the park, celebrating the Eid holiday. That's when the rocket landed. At least 10 were killed, 8 of them children. Dozens more were injured. Ola is just 4 years old. She was out on the street when the rocket exploded. Her sister Bethina was with her. I was sitting in front of the house, she says. A rocket landed and it hit me and my sister. A hospital already overflowing with casualties was engulfed in chaos. Parents and relatives frantically searching for their children. The wards were full of them. 14-year-old Mohammed had shrapnel in his back. We were playing in the streets and they hit us, he said. They targeted us. Lots of children were killed.
I tell you what, I suspect, friends, that as Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel says in one of our videos, we did not attack that school. And what they saw coming was a rocket. And I tell you what I strongly suspect is that Hamas used their own rockets against their own people to try to gain the sympathy of the world by making it appear that Israel did this. And even when Israel's weapons may hit civilians of Gaza, it's only because Hamas is putting them in harm's way. As the Prime Minister of Israel says, Hamas has to take responsibility for the killing and injuries of Israelis and the descendants of Ishmael in Gaza. We're going to watch a little bit more of this, and then we'll go to Ron Prosser's address at the UN.
And next to him, 4-year-old Ola. Shrapnel cut into her small body. Israel has denied it was responsible for this.
Then who fired it? I ran outside and found my daughters. If the Israelis didn't do it, who did?
Your Hamas people did it.
Marching up the hill to bury 2 small boys. They'd played together, they were killed together, and now they were going to be buried together. The boy's father says his sons are martyrs who died for the resistance against Israel.
Today was supposed to be one of a ceasefire, the first day of Eid, the end of Ramadan, a holy festival, a time for celebration and for families to be together. Instead, you have families going to the cemetery to bury their children.
Okay, now I have a comment on that, friends. He talks about Eid, a Ramadan, quote-unquote, holy day. The only true holy days are mentioned in the only true holy Bible, the book of books. King James Version is one of them. And those true holy days are mentioned in Leviticus 23. This Ramadan Eid, so-called holy day, is only a counterfeit that's part of a book called the Quran that's also a counterfeit, not the truth of God.
Gaza's seen many bloody days. Few have been as painful as this one.
And friends, again, Hamas has to take the responsibility for these women and children who they put in front of their weapons, who they've put into a situation and who refuse to stop lobing rockets over into Israel, who could come forward and say, hey, look, for the sake of our people, here's a list of every tunnel. We'll get our people away from them while you blow them up, and here's all the weapons we have against you. And we know that you won't trouble us if we're not shooting these against you. And we know that if you could trust us, you'd open up the borders. And if we hadn't have messed up the trust by kidnapping one of your soldiers before you started the border security, and if we had showed ourselves, if we hadn't destroyed those greenhouses you gave us to make money, if we had built schools with the concrete money you gave us, well, maybe we could be trusted. But Hamas is proving itself to be, and we'll cancel our charter that says we want the destruction of Israel. And we'll stop speaking like that in front of people, that we're not going to stop, we're not going to rest until Israel is destroyed. But then you have others come along to soft pedal, oh, that's not really our goal. Just after somebody else has militantly said it is. Let's go to the next video, friends. Ron Prosser, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, called for members to stand with Israel in the fight against terrorism.
Every single time the international community called for a ceasefire, we seized and Hamas fired. Make no mistake, Hamas is not working alone. It is funded by Qatar and Iran. Every rocket flying out of Gaza could bear the imprint courtesy of Tehran, while every terror tunnel could have a sign that reads, made possible through a kind donation of the Emir of Qatar. Imagine what would your life would be if you lived with these threats over 10 years. The equation is simple, and I said it and I'll repeat it again. If it's going to be quiet in Israel, it's going to be quiet in Gaza. It's as simple as it gets. I call upon each and every one of you to stand with Israel, standing with a nation that fights terrorism and defends its citizens is the same way that you would expect your government to defend you. Stand with good against evil and stand for right over wrong.
Now, friends, there's an excellent speech. Stand for right against wrong. Understand who are the culprits behind this hatred in the descendants of Ishmael with a goal of the militant Hamas organization that calls for the destruction of Israel. All right, let's move now, friends, to conditions elsewhere in the world that call for fresh fighting, or that reveals some fresh fighting close to where the Malaysia Airlines jet went down in Ukraine last week. See, was that last week or just week before? But recently, and has prevented international monitors from accessing the crash site for the second day in a row now.
On the roads through eastern Ukraine, we saw families fleeing the fighting. Victoria and her grandson crammed in their car. They're bombing houses, she says. We want to stay alive. A white cloth, their plea for no harm. And where the smoke is rising, the city which they've left. We saw Ukraine's army fire heavy artillery towards Debaltseve. For months, pro-Russian rebels have held much of the land here, a conflict in which hundreds of civilians have died. Now the Ukrainian army is on the offensive.
This is as far as we're able to go. There's been fierce fighting in towns and cities in this part of eastern Ukraine, particularly around the strategically important city of Donetsk. And it's the Ukrainian government forces that have been making advances, generally speaking in that direction, towards the crash site of flight MH17.
Again today, the fighting prevented Dutch investigators and European security observers from reaching the site, even with armed guards.
We are sick and tired of being interrupted by gunfights, despite the fact that we have agreed that there should be a ceasefire.
But it appears the crash site is not the main objective for these Ukrainian forces. They want to take ground and main roads to the east of Donetsk, which link that important city to Russia. Meanwhile, life for those who still live here is anything but easy. For the essentials, they wait as the fighting goes on. Tom Burridge, BBC News in eastern Ukraine.
Friends, do we hear the Ukraine calling for a ceasefire between pro-Russian separatists and Russia and the Ukrainian government? And what about NATO? What has happened to NATO? Just disappeared from the world scene or from the world news altogether. United States fumbling the ball, and really all because of, we've gone through, friends, several times. I mentioned I'd get to the base of some of these problems. You'll find them in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, the two chapters in the Bible that have been called the blessing and cursing chapters, because in each chapter it starts out with the blessings God will give individuals and a nation if those individuals and the individuals of that nation obey God and keep His commands, as He says. I'll bless you this way and that way. But He says, if you don't obey me, here are the curses. And one of the curses, nationally speaking, in Leviticus 26 and verse 19, God says, I will, if you don't obey me after I've done these certain other cursings upon you, then I will break the pride of your power. And the United States still has, to a large degree, a lot of power it could use. But the pride of that power has been broken. The sins of the people of the United States and the UK, you're not off the hook on this either. I'll come back to a mention of you in a moment. But the sins of the people of the United States have caused a situation where God has put the United States to a curse. He says, if you obey me, I'll bless your agriculture with much rain. Your fruit trees will prosper. But if you don't obey me, just the opposite. I'll withhold the rain. The United States is presently in the worst drought ever on record. We've got the Colorado River drying up on us. The beautiful waters that used to roll through certain areas are now dry, baked earth. And the pride of our power, because of our sins, friends, caused by all kinds of things. God requires the keeping of his whole law. Break one, you've broken them all. But when you go into abominations where God says this or that is an abomination, such things as sexual perversion, and trying to redefine marriage, which God defines as between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife. You've got the United States judges and its government leaders sanctioning marriage between a man and a man or a woman and a woman. Which one's going to be the husband? Which one's going to be the wife? But as I've asked that question on social media, some of my friends have come back immediately and said, hey, Steve, it's a moot question. It's not a marriage. It's from the get-go. Not according to the great God, and it puts the nation under a great curse. We've lost the pride of our power, and yet we run around as if we had that power, trying to pick on and bully people like Israel, when it's just simply trying to defend itself and take out the weaponry and tunnels that a terrorist enemy with the goal of the total destruction of Israel is trying to use for that purpose, to destroy Israel. And the United States interfering and trying to set up situations where Israel's security is put at risk, and where it's told, cease your fire, don't take out these weapons or tunnels. You know, United States, you're already under a great curse. If you're not going to fulfill your NATO goals to the rest of the world, leave Israel alone. Let it work this out, as it would do if you just, stop. And Israel's not the only place where battles and killings are going on. Ukraine, United States, if it were upholding its NATO, if it would back up NATO, it would be in there with some troops on the ground. And even though, hey, Russia's kind of like a big enemy to deal with, well, Russia's been put back. If it saw the United States in there, hey, okay, guys, let's talk now. Russia cannot threaten the United States with cutting off your gas and supplies as it can the rest of Europe. So a lot of Europe is a little bit afraid to sanction Russia too much, and Russia knows they've got an upper hand there with the rest of Europe, and with the United States not using its power and seeing the United States trying to talk its way out of everything and talk, sanction. The sanctions aren't going to work against Russia, not long term. And Russia knows, hey, if we get in there and grab this or that, the sanctions will be meaningless to us anyway, and maybe we'll just, they may be thinking they'd knock us out, but we know from Bible prophecy the one that's going to lay waste the cities of the United States and Israel if the United States and Israel doesn't repent of its gross, abominable sins, especially those of sanctionizing same-sex marriage, which the United States government leaders and judges have no right to be doing. It's in defiance against the great God who puts men in office. The powers that be are supposed to be to put a check on evil. But when they turn bad themselves, they turn the rest of the nation bad, and God does. He keeps his word. He does the curses. He says will apply to individuals and a nation if you don't obey him. And the ultimate will be what we hear prophesied in Ezekiel 6:6 that applies to both sons of Joseph, Ephraim in the UK and Manasseh in the United States, where God, through Ezekiel in chapter 6 and verse 6, says, let me read it for you. He says, "In all your dwelling places, the cities shall be laid waste." And today, that prophecy can be easily fulfilled by the nuclear missiles, guided missiles, that are stockpiled here and there, and that Europe will have control of. Europe may eventually, and Germany too, may even take control of a lot of the nuclear weapons that the United States has stockpiled in their countries there. Because the pride of the power of the United States continues to be pushed down and embarrassed in Germany, which unconditionally surrendered to the allies of World War II, the United States, the UK, France, and Russia. But, hey, the men who fought in World War I have died, most all of them. Many of the men who fought in World War II have died, and are we remembering today the lessons of history and what these countries did and how they signed an unconditional surrender? What was the deadline date for that unconditional surrender to expire, friends? But again, it's the curse that God is allowing to happen, where the pride of the power of the United States is being broken. All right, let's go on. I got just one or two more stories. We're doing an extended broadcast tonight, and we'll wrap it up. Hey, one reason I did a little map for you here. One reason Russia is so interested in Ukraine and some of these other areas is Putin was extremely unhappy at the time the USSR was abandoned. If we look at this map, you see here's where the USSR was before it broke up. And here in this picture, we see all of that territory. You see all of that was red, that same territory that has, a lot of it's become this navy blue color here, purple, navy blue. All of that area was part of the USSR that is now independent. And Russia is independent of the USSR. There's about 15 different countries now. Putin was very unhappy about that, and he's doing what he can to re-grab off, especially the Russian-speaking areas, to grab them back into the Russian domain. But all those areas at one time were part of the USSR, and Russia would like to have them back if they could. Okay, Libya has requested international assistance to put out a fire at a large fuel storage site in Tripoli that was hit by a rocket during militia clashes there. The huge blaze could cause a, quote, humanitarian and environmental disaster, the government has warned. At least 97 people have been killed in fighting between rival militia groups battling for control of Tripoli's main airport in the past week. Rana Yahad reports.
Here an airport that's been closed for 2 weeks because of the fighting over it, and it's practically turned into a scrapyard now. The tanker the storage tanker that was hit by a rocket from the fighting, presumably, and it was a stray rocket, but firefighters are still trying to fight that blaze, and they're struggling with it. The latest we're hearing from the government in the last half an hour is a call for anyone with any kind of car and water supplies that can help in putting out the flame. They're calling them all to go to the site. The problem is there's still some stray Grad rockets falling around Airport Road. I was just speaking earlier to a colleague here who went there, and he said that there's still Grad rockets that are falling near the site. They couldn't get very close to that fuel storage facility.
Okay, friends, that's it for our regular report for tonight. Since we're extended and this last little report could take us up to a full hour, I'll just tell you, for those of you that are just interested in the news that relates to these seals of the Bible prophecy, the second seal, we covered a lot of stories today, the red horse of war and rumors of war. We had some that relate to the pale horse in the terms of disease epidemics and seismic condition, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground, that big lightning strike coming out of the sky in the Los Angeles area near Venice Beach. And thank you for joining us for tonight's report. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow, Tuesday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.